And that's the big kicker, right? Is that this was an abnormal event that happened. So therefore the body is going to respond in a way that we might not be familiar with. But the really great thing about this is that we now have decades of research and brave people who've come out and shared their experience. So now we know what are normal responses to abnormal events. So always shout out to those brave people. So whenever we talk about trauma, one of the big things is understanding that trauma is really about perception, right? So it's not always about the reality of something. It's about whether you perceived that someone was going to die in front of you, or whether you perceived yourself to be almost dying, right? Whether you thought that your life was in danger. It's not always something that we choose, right? Our brain just automatically does it. And so that's the reason why people can come away from big things like a car accident and say, oh, you know what? The entire time I felt like I was on a roller coaster. It was great. There was nothing it wasn't that big of a deal. It didn't impact me. And it might have quite literally not impacted them in that way, right? But let's say someone had a fender bender and that triggered a response of, oh my goodness, this is it. It's the end, right? Regardless of their feelings about it. The reality might be, you know, their car was hit at the back and that's just all that it was. But if that perception is there, then we will go into some of the responses that we'll talk about. So just meet that with a little bit of grace, right? Because sometimes we have a lot of judgment on, should we be feeling a certain way? Should we not be feeling a certain way? Just know that it's really not about our choice in this. It's actually a different part of our brain that's engaged in order to keep us alive. So my handy dandy brain model. Essentially, the things that happen whenever we experience trauma is a couple of different parts of the brain are activated. So if we make a fist and imagine our brain as that fist, we have the brainstem and spinal cord down here, and then we have something called the prefrontal cortex, which is my knuckles right here. And so what the prefrontal cortex is supposed to do is it's designed for empathy, cause and effect. I'm hoping it's engaged right now, right? Like you're really thinking through this information, you're open, you're not distracted and focused. That's what our prefrontal cortex is designed to do. It's really our logic, right? Underneath the prefrontal cortex is the lower part of the brain, right? It's the limbic region, and that's the thumb and right here in the back. And so what the limbic region is designed to do is basically, it's like a smoke detector, the thumb. And so anytime it smells smoke, what it will do is say, there's smoke, right? And the prefrontal cortex comes offline, right? While the smoke detector tries to figure out, what do we do? How do we respond? So then the lower part of the brain will then coordinate with the rest of the bottom part, the downstairs part, to say, what do we do, right? What's the best response to make sure that we stay alive, okay? And so anytime, regardless of whether the smoke's from bacon or from an actual fire, we smell smoke, this thumb thinks that there's smoke, our prefrontal cortex will come offline, right? And what that means, it's called flipping your lid. So what that means is we can be triggered by a lot of different things and have responses like, I don't know, I just ran, I just stood there, time stood still, right? Or I don't know, I just punched them. Regardless of whether those things are right or wrong, right? The logical part is not engaged, right? Which means that it's not a conscious decision. And those three responses that we'll get to in a second talk a lot about what we're kind of predisposed to do, but it's not a conscious choice, okay? So anyone who feels like, I just froze, there was nothing, I felt powerless, I couldn't do anything, why would I not respond? It wasn't your choice, your brain was actually doing all it could to keep you alive in that moment. And that's what it did, right? It thought, okay, freezing is the best option right now, right? So as our brain works together to respond, what therapy looks like, the benefit of therapy is that we come up with a lot of tools to identify whenever smoke happens, right? And knowing that, like, it's good to have smoke detectors in our house, but trying to understand whenever it's bacon, knowing it's bacon, versus whenever it's a fire, knowing it's a fire. And so what therapy does is it helps, we come up with tools to bring your prefrontal cortex back online whenever you feel triggered, right? So that you can make the logical decisions. So, you know, smoke detector starts going off, they're saying, I'm in danger, I'm in danger. You're able to do some deep breathing. You're able to kind of move around and scan the room and say, okay, I thought I was in danger and I could see why, because there was a loud noise, but actually it was the backfire of a truck, right? Matter of seconds, we do this in matter of seconds, okay? So our response to threat is 3 different things, which I already talked about: fight, flight, freeze, right? As you kind of think about this, I use a speedometer on a car, right? So what our brain does, the lower part of our brain works together to do is create either a lot of energy or no energy at all. And you guys can see that I just was checking participants because I'm sharing my screen. So I wanted to make sure no one else was there. So fight flight is that ramping up of energy, right? So our heart starts racing a lot. We have blood coursing through the rest of our body, right? Because we are gearing up to get out or to take them down, right? Whoever them or that thing is. So that's like going 90 miles down the road, right? Like pushing through, not paying attention to traffic, not being aware of any of the other details, right? Maybe you catch bits and pieces of it, but you're really just trying to get out, right? Or get away or through. Freeze is on the other end of the spectrum. So typically we'll go through fight, flight, and if those 2 things aren't an option, our brain, again, the lower part of our brain chooses for us, so it's not us, then we'll go into a sense of freeze. And what that is like is kind of like playing possum or a deer in headlights, right? A lot of animals do it. We are animals after all. And so what they will then do is everything goes internal. We shut down. Our breath is really shallow. Our heart rate is very slow. And in a sense, all our energy is kind of pulled to our chest. And so we really don't have a lot of feeling in our limbs or anything like that, right? And this is proven effective. All of these things are proven very, very effective, right? Freeze is one of the best things. If a prey is kind of moving around a lot and getting hit or hurt, if it does freeze, then the predator doesn't have as much energy. There's not as much energy coursing through to want to fight, right? Which is why sometimes in those weird nature videos that you'll see a predator get disinterested because their fight is not as engaged whenever a freeze happens by their prey. So all that to say, in addition to fight, flight, freeze, we also shut down other parts that we don't need, right? We don't need to be thinking about, oh, my fingernails need to grow, or, oh, I need to make sure I can reproduce, or our sex drive like plummets way down, right? Oh, I want to eat in a couple of hours. Our digestion stops, right? So all of those things that's like preparing for the future really is not an option if there is no future, right? And so what you might notice whenever we have these trauma responses is that it takes a while for our brain to wake up. I'm trying to go to there we go. So the mind and body can do one of 2 things. One, it can stay stuck in that trauma response, right? So that can look like us being really vigilant of our surroundings, scanning the room, sitting in the corner, struggling to sleep and feeling all this energy constantly of like, I need to stay awake. I don't know what's going to happen, right? Any loud noises can bring a lot more attention to us, right? We can feel a lot more attention. We can feel numb or floaty, right? Which is that freeze response where we just feel really disconnected and like we're not really here or living, we're daydreaming a lot. We might be losing time, loss of appetite, difficulty sleeping. All of those things are really normal. And again, that's our body kind of saying, we got to be on alert, right? Or it's not safe yet to be able to kind of come off of this mode. So, and then the other option that you'll notice from this, they kind of go hand in hand, is a level of waking up. So what I mean by that is, and you probably can't see this. Let me see if I can move this. There we go. So waking up from the event, right? So you can feel really kind of drained or tired excessively after this form of hypervigilance or fight, right? You can be very, very hungry or just notice suddenly, man, I'm so dehydrated from all of this, right? I feel like I haven't slept in days fully. That's super normal. What is happening there is essentially your body is feeling some sense of what we call felt safety. So whenever I may sit in this room and think, okay, I'm safe. I know I'm safe, right? The doors are locked. I have my phone ready to go if anything happens. I'm able to see a lot of different parts of the room. It's a big room. That I may know that, but I might not have a sense of feeling safe, right? Where my body really can say, okay, it's time to let our guard down. It's time to kind of pass through this response. We're done behaving in this way. And so again, that's normal. That is entirely normal, okay? And as you continue, as we get more days out, as you get assistance and continue to try to work through some of this, you'll notice your body waking up, okay? So all of those things are normal and they come in different stages. Again, you might find like I'm really, really tired one day and then you struggle to fall asleep again the next. That's normal too. It's kind of like your body coming out of it, right? Which is why we do these things. And that leads us to our next thing, right? So we're going to do some grounding, right? Which is basically the same thing we did at the beginning. But the reason we're doing this, again, is to bring your body into the here and now. The explosion is not happening anymore. It's over. It's done. Okay? And that's why grounding can be so important because it brings you into that present. We ground through our senses. So we're going to do another activity that talks a little bit about the different senses that we have. And it's kind of similar to the first. So what I'd like for you to do is go ahead and take a minute to land, okay? And so notice where you feel the weight in your body the most, right? So for me, right now it's my butt, right? I really feel my tailbone in the chair. It's super solid and strong. And as I trace that feeling, right, as I kind of continue to notice it and just meet it with curiosity, and not judgment, I also feel it in my thighs, right? My legs are feeling a little floaty. They're on the ground, but I don't feel them as much as I do my thighs, right? And so all I'm asking you to focus on is what feels like you're the most secure. Where do you notice that? And then as you think about that, I'd like for you to imagine sending breath to that area. So imagine pulling breath to, for me, it's my thighs, right? And noticing where else that breath wants to go. For me, it's traveling down, going to my legs. And I'm even rubbing my hands on my legs, which again is a sensory thing. It's bringing me into the present. So as you breathe in and out, then I want you to notice what's going on in your mouth, right? Is there a lot of saliva in there? Is there not that much? It's normal that we can have a lot of dry mouth, right? Because saliva is a part of our digestive system, also makes us have an appetite, right? So a fun little trick that we can do is actually, if you imagine just taking your hand and putting it to your lips, holding it there, and notice what happens to your mouth. So we've been doing this since we were 2 years old, if not more, right? We've been practicing the same motion over and over. And so that's a surefire way to kind of get the saliva back in, because our brain is preparing for, okay, we know there's food. Every time we do this, usually there's food. So here we go. And then notice, is there any taste associated with that saliva? Is there something you're craving? Water, a mint, candy. Don't hesitate to go get that. Why not? And then as you do that, I also want you to notice if there's any energy that you have right now. And where is that energy the most? So as you think of that energy, if you kind of notice it moving, where is it going? Right? Imagine sending air to that space, to your chest, to your legs, and not being afraid to use some of that energy right now. As you connect, just kind of thinking, what does it feel like to connect? Does it feel familiar? Does it feel scary? Does it feel frustrating? Does it feel new? Meeting everything without judgment. Cool. I'm going to stop real quick and ask for any particular questions. I want to make sure we're good on time, but I just want to pause as we're kind of thinking through some of this. Any questions or areas that would be helpful for me to go deeper into that we haven't talked about just yet? Cool. We're pressing on. Okay. Back into brain world. So now we're going to spend the rest of our time talking a little bit about the after effects of trauma. So is there a chat? Christy, you good on those things?
I just said, any questions? How are you guys feeling?
Cool. Awesome. So let's go back to the after effects of trauma, right? So 3 things typically happen, right? We talked about the trauma response, what we do in the trauma, how those things can kind of stay stuck. And now we realize 3 things. A, we survived. So guess what? You did it. You're done. You did the job. Your body did it, which is amazing, right? Because that's exactly what it was supposed to do. It did exactly what it was supposed to do to keep you alive. Maybe we didn't like how we got there, but at the end of the day, you survived something really, really hard, and that's something to be proud of, period. Then our brain attempts to kind of organize this memory. And what happens with that is it's like, this is really important, right? Like this really influenced us. We almost died here. So obviously it's going to be at the forefront of our thought, right? Like it's in the front part of our brain, which is a lot of time why the memory runs on loop, which we're going to talk about in a second, right? And it can make it hard to sleep. So our brain's like, okay, what do we do with this? It's super important. We got to do something. And then our brain says, okay, here's the thing. This is my best guess. We're going with these things because I still don't, it's fragmented. The memory is pretty fragmented. So we're just going to go with every time you hear a loud boom, you run, right? And a lot of times that can be really successful, right? That's why we are around as humans. That's why we've evolved so much, is because of our brain's ability to adapt and do that. What makes it super difficult, though, is whenever those responses, those survival responses that are created by the brain really impact our life. right? To the point where it might paralyze us. So if our brain decides, okay, every time you hear a loud noise, you just play dead, you freeze, and that allows hours to go by where you're not able to be as productive at work because you're in that state of frozen. You're not able to care for your children because you're in that frozen state, right? That's whenever there's an issue. We all have adaptations. Adaptations they're not a bad thing at all, right? It's what makes us so special as humans. It's whenever those adaptations from one big, really important event impact the rest of our life, right? In a negative way, that's whenever we have an issue. So you survived it, it's over. Let's talk about how the brain organizes your memories. So this is I really like this picture because I think it does a good job of describing what it's like to kind of be jumbled and fragmented, right? So your brain is like, this is not us going to the grocery store and, remembering milk and then getting milk and then telling our spouse later on that night, or this is not us going and playing recess and having a good time, right? This is like a big memory. This is really important. And so what it does with that, whenever it's life or death, is it tries to play it on repeat to figure out what happened. How do I make this work, right? What should I have done? And what's the snag with that is that the reality is you could not have done anything, right? This was out of your control. This was a crime. It was unpredictable, right? And crime happens. And that really sucks. But the reality is that you could not have done anything more than you've already done, right? And so whenever our brain kind of plays it on repeat, the logical part isn't always online, right? So the logical part isn't there to say like, but we did the best we could because we're still, our lid is flipped. So it does that. And then there's also like the fragmented parts don't always look like what we call episodic. So it's not like you watch a story from A to B to C. It's fragmented sensory things. So what I mean by that is it's maybe that flash of, okay, I see broken glass on the floor. I taste metal. I heard a boom, right? So those things are kind of come in and out, and you're not sure all the time. Maybe you're really positive, who knows? But you're not sure, okay, was it broken glass first or was it the boom first? Well, it must have been the boom first if the broken glass happened after, right? So then we kind of logic our way, but we're really not sure of the exact order. And that is so normal. That is hugely normal, right? The reason being because it doesn't matter what the order is. The most important part is if you see broken glass, your heart needs to start going up, right? Because we could be unsafe now. So the brain isn't prioritizing, well, how did this story really happen, right? It's focusing on how do I keep myself alive and continue to stay alive. So again, your body is doing exactly what it needs to do. It's doing it. And we can adjust certain things as we need to, but it's doing exactly what it needs to right now, okay? So here are some survival responses that we kind of talked a little bit about a couple minutes ago. Go ahead, I'm not going to read all of these lists, but again, this comes from, like the survival responses can come from, here's how we adapt to make sure this never happens again. Even though the logical part of our brain knows we can do a couple of things to try to make sure something like this doesn't happen. But ultimately, the world is this unsafe place, right? And while we can do some things, we can't do everything to make sure it never happens again. So as you kind of look through these, go ahead and see if there's anything that sticks out in particular. anything that you relate to or have questions on. And again, recognizing that it's important to know, be patient with yourself through this.
Linda asked, what is a good way to respond to individuals who are telling you to quote, get over it and quote, move on?
Yeah, that's a really good point. So group effort here, if anybody has any thoughts on that, I'm going to give my shot at it first and then people can add. But yeah, I think first of all, talking to yourself a little bit, right? I talk to myself all the time. And I say, hey, this was important to me. This was a really big deal. This was life or death, right? And ultimately, at the end of the day, I'm responding in the way that I need to, but this is okay. And I'm going to have my own process and my own recovery, right? From this, I'm going to get through it. But to those people who are saying that, they don't know, they don't have the context, right? And then the other thing I would say is just really focusing on, this is my path to recovery, right? This is my path, right? This isn't anyone else's. I'm only focused on me, right? And so whenever people might say that, letting them know, this was actually a traumatic event. It was classified as a traumatic event, right? And I'm doing the best I can to work through it right now. That's some of the things I would say. I would also say you don't have to prove yourself to them either, right? Like, you don't have to tell them, well, here's all the reasons why I'm this way. Here's all the reason why I'm not this way. That's not your responsibility, right? And seeking support from others who are able to provide that patience, right? Able to hold that space for you and say, like, yeah, that was a big deal. Yeah, that was important. That's my shot in the dark. Any other thoughts?
I was just thinking about the trauma research that you mentioned at the beginning and
Mhm.
the invisibility of, like, there are really significant things happening in the brain that
Mm-hmm.
we can't see. It's not like a bleeding wound or you don't have a cast or something
Yeah.
invisible. So that's kind of a sign of, like, there was damage that happened.
Yeah.
But the brain research shows that
There is.
there's a real impact.
Yeah.
I think it's important to, but hard for other people to acknowledge because you can't see it.
Yeah. So Melinda's making a good point here. Like, for a lot of us, whenever it's physical, right? Like if it's a broken arm or something like that, it makes a lot of sense to say, okay, this is why, you can't move stuff because it's really obvious you have a broken arm, right? You see it. But helping people, like providing some research to say, actually, there's tons of research out there about how much the brain is impacted by trauma. That's underneath the surface, right? That's underneath. Am I getting what you're saying? And we can provide, we have at least 3 different resources that we can send. I'll put it in the chat. Linda, can you help Christy get those?
Yeah, and it might be helpful for people to share that information with their friends and family
Yeah.
members, like just to educate. Just to share, because it's not a commonly understood phenomenon.
Yeah.
So helping educate your people around you.
Yeah. So at the beginning, I said, there's a bunch of brave people who came forward, who were able to share their story to say, this is how people respond to abnormal events, right? I said that was decades old. And what I mean by that is it's not like this is happening, this happened, this is new, trauma is new. That's not true, right? But it is a new field, which sucks. That makes it really, really hard. So what I mean by that is that we are coming out with research, but it takes a lot of time for that research to be published and then to go into the public sphere for people to say, oh, okay, these are common responses to trauma, right? People kind of know about fight, flight. They don't know about freeze. Freeze is super common, but it's because we learned that decades ago, right? It's not centuries ago. And so that makes it hard too, because it's not really super well known, but it's getting there. And then I think we're trying to put some stuff in, if we could put in some links to some common sites for common responses to trauma. We have a SAMHSA article, I think, and then the MNPD. Yeah. Anything else? Cool. Okay. And then Christy, can you make sure those resources are sent? Cool. Okay, so these are, and then this is another response to trauma, right? So difficulty leaving the home, feeling alone, right? Those, or difficulty being alone, super normal, super normal. Worsening of existing medical problems, right? Again, that stress kind of coursing through our body can make asthma worse, right? It can also make diabetes worse. We know that, we've learned that over the years, that people are more susceptible to that. You might even notice, like, I have an extra dose of, of alcohol. I have an extra glass of wine just to take the edge off, or feel like I can't get through the day without, that drink at the end of the day to really wind down and bring myself down. Now, again, those are survival responses, right? You're doing the best you can with what you have. Now, some things are better than others. And what is helpful, and this is why therapy exists, right, is to give more options, right, than just that one survival response. So if you're feeling like, man, all I can do is I just have to drink in order to bring myself down. It's not to say as a therapist, oh, we're going to take all those options away. You just can't do any of those. We actually want to increase your options, right? And so rather than alcohol or substances being the only option, or having a reluctance to leave home being the only solution, okay, I'm just going to live from home. I'm going to do everything from home now, right? We want to give you more options with that, right? To be able to kind of bring that anxiety down or bring up that energy, right? So if you notice I'm getting into that frozen state, then we want to come up with solutions to kind of bring you up. Or if I'm getting into that anxious state, we want to come up with solutions to kind of bring you down. And that's specific to the individual. So, general things that we can do as a result of this: finding support, connecting with our community, really trying to be aware that our community might not understand, right? And so one of the things that we are offering is in February, we're looking to do some support groups for people so that everyone can kind of be together and grieve together their experience. Even though all the experiences are different, we can kind of create that safe place to be able to share it, which might not always be found in everyone's community. Move your body, go on walks. If you feel like you can't leave the house, walk down the hallway, back and forth, right? Trace something, just move your feet, move your body. Eat healthy meals, rest, drink plenty of water, drink water. Your body needs water. Plain and simple. I think we're 80% water, so we want to make sure we get some of that stuff in there. Try to find some sense of a routine, right? This especially helps with people who have difficulty sleeping. So kind of try to stick to the same thing over and over. It's called sleep hygiene, right? So you're wanting to do, okay, for me, I take out my contacts, I wash my face, I brush my teeth, and then I lay down and boom, I'm out, because my brain knows it's about to, you're about to go to sleep. You're preparing. So I'm starting to get tired as I'm doing those three things. And then celebrate your success. Hello, again, you survived it. You did it. That's so important, right? And so if you're able to do something that's really hard, regardless of how other people feel about it, whether they think it's a big deal or not, who cares? You did it, and that's important. And if you need people to celebrate with, then that's an option. That's another option for therapy, right? Or just choosing friends who are going to celebrate with you, right? Like being strategic in the friends that you choose, knowing that your community might have a lot of mixed bags, right? So you might not be able to say to a family member or a significant other, might not be able to share intimate details and the sadness that you might feel, but they might be right by your side to celebrate something that was really hard for you. So basing that off the strengths of your community. And then options with Catholic Charities. So you can, we have a support group starting in February that we plan on doing. You can partner with a case manager to kind of help navigate a lot of the overwhelming stuff that comes after the bomb, and then engage in counseling. Now, this is my soapbox that I will promise to try to be on for only 30 seconds, but you want to make sure you have a therapist that's qualified. So what I mean by that is they need to have experience dealing with trauma, right? Beyond just the basics stuff. So you're looking for people who have training, extra training in sensory motor, EMDR, right? Those are some of the words that you're kind of looking for, talking about polyvagal theory, that kind of stuff. If you have any other questions as far as, I have a therapist already, would they be able to help me with this? They're saying they can, right? Because that's really common. Therapists will say, oh yeah, I can take that on, I can do this. Then, we can kind of talk. I'm happy to be able to provide some consultation on that, as well as resources, because ultimately you're the one that's making the decision, right? It's your recovery. Okay, a lot of stuff. Any questions from that? Any additional questions? Because we're going to move into another activity and we're not going to talk about the bomb anymore. So I want to make sure if we have any other questions, I'm happy to answer them. Hey, Melinda, could you go get a container? That might be really helpful. So it's not a hard and fast rule. You can ask more questions, but I'm going to have you do the same activity again. So keep in mind, anytime that we talk about this stuff, our brain starts to go and it's like, oh, how does this relate? How does that relate? What do we do? Blah, 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 blah. How do we stay safe, right? And so one of the things that's super helpful, thank you so much. One of the things that's really, really helpful with this is actually making a secure place to be able to store this memory or memories, right, in this process. And we do that by making a container. So you can do one of two things. You can find something at home, like a box like this, that can be a container. If you're a concrete person, that can be really, really helpful. If you love to imagine things, you might want to draw it. You can choose to do that too, right? And the whole point of this is to make sure it's super safe, right? So you start out by doing that. Now, if this is your container, whenever you put your memories in, it's going to dump out pretty easily, right? What's to stop anyone from putting their hand in here and getting something out? So it has to be secure. You want to make sure it's as secure as possible. If it's not secure, your memories are going to come out. And that's why the activity would not work. So making sure it's as secure as you possibly can. Things that you can imagine adding to your container, locks, key codes, that kind of stuff, right? We have yarn. You can take yarn. You can even say, this yarn's really amazing yarn, right? It actually is so flexible, but it only opens to my touch and it never snaps, right? So you can add things like that that can be helpful and resourceful. And then once you do that, once you make it really, really secure, and if you want to invite a higher power, if you're religious and that's supportive to you, you can invite your higher power into that. Or if you have a helpful person in your life that might be helpful to incorporate, you can imagine them sitting by you, giving you that support. You're going to put the memories of that, right? Memories of the explosion, memories of maybe the sadness of it, maybe other experiences that you've had. And then you'll put that in there. And then if you need help, imagine your higher power with you and close it, right? Make sure all the locks are there. Once you finish that, then you're going to find a really, if you have a physical container, You need to put it in a really secure place. Put it in a closet on the high shelf so the kids don't get to it, right? Like thinking through some of those things and placing it in a really secure place. And then once that happens, walk away, right? So if you're doing this visually, then you're going to imagine walking away from it, okay? Closing the door and walking away. And what's different about the memory now is that you get to go back whenever it's your choice, not whenever the memory wants to, right? But it's whenever it's your choice. Cool. And notice after you do that, what's different? What stayed the same? Anything else? So with all that being said, that's the show. That's our show. If you have any other questions or concerns, please feel free to share that in the chat. I also have, if you want to sign up for our services, whether it be case management, counseling, and or both, you can go to that website. If you have questions, you can email me or call me. I think that is it. That's all I have. We're happy to do another training and go more in depth, but this was just kind of an overview, just to help people understand that the typical responses to an abnormal event. So thank you all for attending. Really, really appreciate it.